A woman with a clipboard called the police on a black father as he walked his daughter to her first-grade classroom. She had no idea that the man in that hallway had been hired 3 weeks earlier to lead the very department she was calling. She had no idea he would stand in her school with his hands behind his back in front of 40 phones held in the air and never once mention his rank. She was wrong. Before we go any further, leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you do not want to miss. It started at 5:40 in the morning in a rented kitchen on Mercer Road that smelled like burnt toast and yesterday's coffee. Elijah Cross had been living in Harlow for 11 days. The extended stay unit came with a 2-burner stove and a window looking out over a parking lot where somebody's sprinkler came on at dawn whether it had rained or not. The closing on the house on Bellwood Street had been delayed twice, so he was living out of 3 boxes and a duffel bag, and on the first night he unpacked only 2 things: Amara's bedding, with the constellation pattern she had picked out herself, and a black pocket notebook wrapped with a rubber band. Every morning, the notebook went into his shirt pocket the way other men carried a wallet. Amara Cross was 6 years old, and she had opinions. She wanted the sunflower dress, not the blue one, because the blue one was for church, and church was on Sunday, and today was not Sunday. She wanted 4 braids, not 2, and she wanted to count them herself in the mirror while he worked. He sat on the edge of the bathtub, with the comb between his teeth and the jar of hair grease open on the tile, and she counted to 4, then said it again just to make sure. 4, she said. That's the right number. That's the right number, he agreed. Her mother had done 6. Renata had died 2 summers earlier, on a Thursday afternoon in a grocery store parking lot, from something in her brain no one knew was there. He had learned to do braids instead, and he had learned the difference between the kind of cough that meant dust and the kind of cough that meant call someone. He kept the little blue inhaler on the counter beside the keys, and the plastic was scratched almost white from 4 years in and out of pockets. That morning, it read 104. He wrote it down. Before he wrote anything in that notebook, a dose count, a mileage number, a name, he always wrote the time first. Renata had bought him the first one at a drugstore in Dayton when he was 26, after an arrest that ended with a lie he had no way to disprove. If your word is going to mean something, she had told him, put a clock on it. He had filled 19 of them since. The truck was a gray pickup with a dented tailgate and a booster seat strapped into the back. It smelled like the cinnamon gum Amara wasn't supposed to have on school days. They drove east on Mercer with the windows down because the air conditioning had a mind of its own, and the morning already had that thick, late August heat that makes the asphalt smell like tar and pennies. "Daddy," Amara said, "what if nobody sits with me?" "Then you'll have room to spread out." "That's not an answer." "You're right," he said. "Somebody will sit with you, and if they don't, you go sit with them." She thought about that for the span of 2 stoplights. He watched her in the mirror, seeing her work it through with her mouth moving a little. Weatherly Elementary sat at the top of a hill on Dunmore Avenue, a long brick building with an east wing added in the 1970s and a marquee out front by the flagpole. The marquee said, "Welcome ACK Families," because the B had slipped out of its track and was lying at the bottom of the case. Parents stood in the grass with their phones out, taking the picture every one of them takes, the kid on the sidewalk with the too big backpack. Cross parked in a visitor spot because it was the first day, and on the first day you walk them in. Behind the counter, a woman named Bernice Kepler managed the visitor log, the phones, and, judging by the look of her desk, most of the building. Cross printed his name on the sign-in sheet, along with Amara's name and her room number. He wrote the time in the column, the same time he wrote in his own notebook a second later, standing right there at the counter with his back to the trophy case. 7:52. Bernice Kepler peeled a visitor sticker off the roll and handed it to him, and he smoothed it onto his shirt over the pocket, over the notebook. Room 11, she said. Miss Rahman. Down the main hall, left at the mural. The mural was a whale. Miss Priya Rahman stood at her door in a yellow cardigan, shaking hands with 6-year-olds like they were arriving at a gala. She crouched down to Amara's level and asked her name, and Amara said it and then spelled it, which she always did with strangers. 4 braids, Miss Rahman said. That's the right amount, Amara said. Cross hung her backpack on the hook with her name on it and crouched down. He told her he loved her, that he'd be in the pickup line at 3:15, that she was going to be fine. She wrapped her arms around his neck for exactly as long as she wanted, then let go and walked into that room without looking back, which is its own kind of knife. He was halfway across the parking lot before he remembered. The inhaler was in the cup holder. He had checked the dose counter, written it down, set it beside his keys, picked up the keys, and left the inhaler behind. 4 years without forgetting it once, and he forgot it on the very first day of first grade. He closed his hand around it and headed back up the slope toward the doors. On the way, he passed the East Wing service door and noticed something he couldn't stop noticing. Someone had jammed it open with a folded rubber doorstop. The latch had been taped over, and a mop bucket sat just inside the doorway with the wringer sticking up. Anyone coming off Dunmore Avenue could have walked in and been standing in a hallway with 200 children in less than 9 seconds. Then he pulled out his notebook and wrote down the time, and wrote, East service door, propped, latch taped, unmonitored. He went in through the front because that's how you go in. Bernice Kepler had a phone in each hand and a parent at the counter asking about bus routes. Cross held up the visitor sticker on his chest, the one she had given him 9 minutes earlier, and she looked at it, then at him, and waved him through with 2 fingers without breaking her sentence. That wave was going to matter. The main hall was loud now, the kind of loud a first morning brings. He was about 10 meters from the whale mural when a voice rang out on his right, bright and hard as a nailhead. Sir, can I help you? The woman had a lanyard, a clipboard, and a cream blazer that had no business being worn in that heat. She stood in the middle of the hallway the way people stand when they believe the hallway belongs to them. Her name was Delia Prescott. She sold houses on the north side of Harlow. She'd chaired the Weatherly Parent Safety Committee for 2 years running, and she had a laminated card in her wallet that said so. My daughter's in room 11, Cross said. She forgot this. He opened his hand. A small blue plastic inhaler, scuffed white, warm from the truck. Delia Prescott didn't look at his hand. She looked at his boots, then at the canvas jacket he hadn't bothered to change out of, then at his face, and back down the hall toward the doors, as if measuring the distance. You'll need to sign in at the office, she said. I did, 7:52. I didn't see you. That's all right, Cross said. The log did. He said it without the slightest edge. That was the thing people got wrong about Elijah Cross in the first 5 minutes. He was quiet in the way of men who've already seen how a room ends, and some people read that as slowness, while Delia Prescott read it as something else entirely. She stepped sideways into the alcove by the trophy case, turned her shoulder to him, and took out her phone. And she didn't call the office, even though it was just 40 feet away, with a woman inside who had his name written down in ink. She called the non-emergency line, which in Harlow rings through to a desk sitting 11 feet from a patrol sergeant, and she used 4 words that were not a crime, but were not nothing either. There's a man inside, Cross heard about half of it. He heard male, and I don't recognize him, and then the phrase she would later repeat under oath without any apparent sense of what it carried inside it. He doesn't look like a parent here. He didn't walk away. He also didn't walk toward her. He stood by the whale mural with a child's inhaler in his hand and did the thing he had done for 16 years, which was to get the time first. 7:59, notebook, pocket. Miss Rahman's door stood open 8 feet away. He could see the back of Amara's head, the 4 braids, at a table with a boy in a red shirt showing her something in a pencil case. She had found someone to sit with in less than 4 minutes. Instead, he waited, because he already knew what was coming down that hallway, and he knew exactly how it would go worse if he moved. Officer Ryan Merrick had been with the Harlow Police Department for 6 years. He was 31, and his uniform was crisp in the way of a man who irons on Sundays. He was not a monster. That has to be said plainly, because the story is worse if he is, and truer if he is not. He had one habit he had never been made to confront. When a caller was certain, he arrived certain. He came through the front doors at 8:04 with a second unit behind him, and Delia Prescott already talking, walking backward in front of him with the clipboard pressed to her chest. "He came in the side," she said. "Nobody knows him." Cross had come in through the front. Bernice Kepler had waved him through. The log had his handwriting on it. None of that had been said yet, and everything that happened in that hallway happened inside that gap. "Sir, keep your hands where I can see them." Cross opened both hands, palms out at his sides. The inhaler sat in his right hand. "What's in your hand?" "Albuterol, my daughter's. She's in room 11. "Set it on the floor." He crouched slowly, set it on the linoleum, and stood back up with his hands out. The hallway had gone quiet in patches, the near part first, then farther out. Teachers stood in their doorways, and a custodian named Walter Boyd was at the far end with a push broom and a look on his face. Phones started rising into the air. "Do you have identification?" "In my wallet, back left pocket. I'm going to reach with 2 fingers." "Don't reach. Turn around and face the wall." هناك لحظة في هذا النوع من القصص كان يمكن للرجل الذي يتعرض للإهانة فيها أن ينهي كل شيء. كان كروس يملكه في جيب قميصه. ليس الدفتر تحته، رسالة مطوية على أوراق رسمية للمدينة، موقعة من مدير مدينة هارلو بتاريخ قبل ذلك ب11 يوماً، تؤكد تعيينه رئيساً للشرطة اعتباراً من أول يوم 2 من سبتمبر. لكنه لم يقل شيئاً من ذلك. سأله الناس لماذا، وهو يعطي الجواب نفسه كل مرة: شارة. لا تمنع هذا من الحدوث إلا للرجل الذي يحمل الشارة. ليست حلاً، إنها مجرد مجاملة، وهو لم يكن يريد مجاملة. كان يريد أن يحدث له ما كان على وشك أن يحدث. ذلك الممر وسجل الدخول والهواتف 40 والشريط اللاصق على ذلك المزلاج. أن يحدث بدلاً من ذلك لأب يرتدي سترة قماشية ويحمل بخاخ ربو إنقاذي، حتى لا يستطيع أحد لاحقاً أن يقول إن النظام نجح لأنه تعرف على أحد أبنائه. استدار وواجه الحائط. ضع يديك خلف ظهرك. هل أنا قيد الاعتقال؟ أنت محتجز. بأي تهمة؟ دخول غير قانوني إلى ممتلكات المدرسة. وضع كروس يديه خلف ظهره. أغلقت الأصفاد على معصميه. أقفلها ميريك بالقفل المزدوج كما تقتضي الإجراءات، وهو أيضاً الصوت الذي جعل امرأة في الممر تبدأ بالبكاء، تلك الطقطقة المعدنية الصغيرة 2 مرة. سيدي، ما اسمك؟ إيلايجا كروس. إيلايجا كروس. هل لديك طالب مسجل هنا؟ أمارا كراس، الصف الأول، الغرفة 11، ومعلمتها بريا رامان. لقد طلب منه المغادرة مرتين، قالت ديليا بريسكوت من خلفهم، وهذه هي الجملة نفسها، الجملة التي عرضت في نشرات الأخبار في 4 ولايات، وتليت بصوت عال في قاعة محكمة، وطبعت على لافتة رفعتها امرأة على درجات المحكمة لم تكن قد التقت إيلايجا كروس في حياتها. أشخاص مثله لا يتجولون داخل مدرسة كهذه بلا سبب. لم يضحك أحد، لكن لم يقل أحد شيئاً أيضاً، وهذا هو الجزء الذي ظل كروس يفكر فيه لأسابيع بعد ذلك، واقفاً أمام الموقد عند منتصف الليل، 15 بالغاً في ممر، والصوت الوحيد طوال 4 ثوان كاملة كان صوت التهوية. ثم قالت بريا رامان: هذا والد أمارا، لقد قابلته قبل 9 دقائق. لم يلتفت ميريك. هذه هي طبيعة الوصول، وأنت متيقن. المعلومات لا تتوقف عن الوصول، لكنها فقط تتوقف عن القدرة على الوصول إليك. كان أمامه رجل مكبر بالأصفاد، وفك الأصفاد عن رجل أمام ممر مليء بالهواتف له ثمن. أما إخراجه إلى الخارج فلم يكن له ثمن، على الأقل في ذلك الصباح. سيدتي، من فضلك تراجعي. لقد وقع في السجل، قالت بريا رامان بصوت أعلى. بيرنس سمحت له بالمرور، لقد رأيته يفعل ذلك. سنرتب الأمر في المكتب. لكنهم لم يرتبوا الأمر في المكتب، مروا به بجانب المكتب. هذه التفصيلة ظهرت لاحقاً أيضاً من سجل الدخول الذي يحمل خط يده هو نفسه والوقت في الخانة، وكان موضوعاً على المنضدة على بعد 11 قدماً من الباب الذي أخذوه من خلاله. The hallway had turned into a corridor of raised rectangles. Cross counted them because that's the shape his mind takes under pressure, and the number he wrote in his notebook that night was 41. He kept his chin level and his eyes on the doors, and he didn't act calm and he didn't act outraged. And on every one of those screens, either choice would have looked different depending on who was watching. Then a small voice behind him said, "Daddy?" He would have given all of it back for that. The letter in his pocket, the 16 years, the appointment, every bit of it, if it meant she'd stayed inside that doorway 11 seconds longer. Amara Cross had stepped out of room 11 because the hallway had gotten loud, and she knew her father's voice in it. She stood there on the tile in her sunflower dress, her hair in 4 braids, and she saw an officer gripping her father's arm, his hands behind his back. And she did what children do. She looked at the adults' faces to figure out how scared she was supposed to be. Cross turned his head, only his head, and put everything he had into his voice, and when it came out, it was steady and unhurried and warm. "Baby, I'm okay. This is a mistake, and the grown-ups are going to fix it. You go back inside with Miss Raman. I'll be in the pickup line." "Why are your hands like that?" "Because they're being careful," he said. "Go on. 4 braids." Priya Raman stepped between her and the hallway and turned her around, both hands on her shoulders, and Amara went. And at the door she looked back once. Somebody filmed that too. They walked him out past the marquee that said, "Welcome back, families," across the grass where parents had been taking first day pictures 9 minutes earlier. A man in a golf polo said, out loud, "Well, something happened." A woman near the flagpole said, "Oh my God, at a school!" And it wasn't even clear to her which part she meant. Delia Prescott stood on the top step with her clipboard against her chest and watched the whole way to the cruiser. Later, she would say she'd done what the training told her to do. And there really was a training, a slide deck from a company in Columbus with one slide that said, "If you do not recognize them, you are the first line." It said nothing about a visitor log. Merrick put a hand on top of the cruiser door frame. "Watch your head." Cross sat down. The seat was hot vinyl, sticking to the back of his neck, and a laminated card was zip-tied to the partition with the fleet number on it. He read the number and memorized it. Old habit. Then he looked up at the shoulder of the man shutting the door on him, at the black square clipped above the pocket of Merrick's uniform shirt, and he saw something that changed the shape of the next 4 months. The light on it was off. The Harlow City Jail was in the basement of the municipal building on Fenner Street, and it smelled like floor stripper and radiator dust. They took the notebook. That was the part that got to him. Not the cuffs, not the walk, not the vinyl seat. A woman slid a plastic bin across the counter, and he emptied his pockets into it, and the black notebook with the rubber band went in on top of his keys. She wrote a number on the bin with a grease pencil and set it on a shelf with 9 other bins. 19 notebooks in a box under his bed on Mercer Road. The 20th on a shelf in a basement. Empty the shirt pocket, too. He took out the folded letter on city letterhead and set it in the bin face down. She didn't read it. There is no version of that morning where she would have. She had 11 people to process and a printer that jammed on the 3rd page every time, and the letter was just a piece of paper in a bin. This is how systems fail. Not with a villain, but with a pile of small, correct procedures nobody has followed all the way through. The charge was criminal trespass, 4th degree. Because it happened on school property during school hours, there was a second line item that carried an entirely different weight, and Cross read it with his hands free for the first time in 50 minutes. He stood on the painted footprints for the photo and looked into the lens the way he had told 1,000 people to look into it, chin level, eyes open. At 9:40, they let him make a call. He did not call the city manager. He called Verna Boyd, 71, who lived on the ground floor on Mercer Road and had knocked on his door on day 2 with a foil pan of cornbread. "Verna, I need you at Weatherly at 3:15 for Amara." A pause on the line. "Where are you, baby?" "Fenner Street. I'll be out today." "Fenner Street is the jail." "Yes, ma'am." "What do I tell her?" "Tell her I got held up at work and sent my best person," he said. "Then let her ask whatever she wants, and don't lie to her. She'll know." "She'll know," Verna agreed. He was released at 11:50 on his own recognizance, with a court date in 19 days and a paper bag holding a notebook, keys, a wallet, and a folded letter. The first thing he did on Fenner Street was sit on a low brick wall by the parking meters and write down the time. Then everything else, in order, in the smallest handwriting he had, from 5:40 in the morning to 11:50. The wave of 2 fingers at the counter, the 4 seconds of ventilation, the tape on the east service door latch. And on the last line, underlined once, the 4 words that would take 4 months and a state audit to become a sentence anybody believed. The camera light was off. His truck was still parked in a visitor space at Weatherly. He walked the 2.5 miles back to it because his phone was down to 4%. There was a yellow slip tucked under the wiper. Unauthorized vehicle. He folded it into his shirt pocket without reading past the first line. At 3:05, he was in the pickup line, second car from the front. Verna Boyd was standing by the flagpole in a church hat in the heat, because she had said she would be there, and she had no way of knowing he'd make it. Amara came out with her backpack on both shoulders and a folder with "My First Day" written on it in marker. She climbed into the back seat, buckled herself in, and didn't say a word for a block and a half. Then she said, "Micah shared his pencil case. That's good. He has a mechanical one. That's a serious pencil case." "Daddy." She waited. "Miss Rahman said what happened this morning was a grown-up mistake, and it wasn't about me, and it wasn't about you." Cross kept his eyes on the road. "Miss Rahman is right." "Was it because you're brown?" He had known that question was coming since 8:05 that morning. He had gone over 4 different answers in the vinyl seat. In the end, he used the one Renata would have used, the true one, cut down to the size of a 7-year-old. "Some people look at a person and decide things before they know anything," he said. "That's something wrong with them. It is not something wrong with you or me. And there are rules about it, and when people break those rules, there's a way to make it right. That's part of what I do at work." "Is it going to be fixed?" "Yes." "When?" "Not today." She took that better than most adults would have. After a while, she said she was hungry, and they ate chicken sandwiches in the truck with the doors open. That night, after her bath and 2 chapters and the 3rd glass of water that was really a bargaining tactic, he sat on the floor of the front room with his back against the wall and the laptop resting on a cardboard box. He was not going to sue anybody that week. He was not going to call a reporter. He was not going to call the city manager and wait to be rescued, because being rescued would answer nothing. He was going to build a record. He pulled up the department policy manual, which was public, and read all 211 pages. He read it the way a mechanic listens to an engine, waiting for the sound that doesn't belong. And he found it on page 63, in the language about recording obligations, because he had written it. Not for Harlow. 9 years earlier, when he was a sergeant on a state task force in Columbus, Elijah Cross had helped write the model recording standard the Attorney General's office later published as guidance for city police departments. The section on mandatory activation, the section on retention, the section that said any officer-initiated contact, including detentions on school property, required the camera to be turned on before first contact, and that each department had to certify compliance every quarter. 5 years earlier, Harlow had adopted Cross's wording word for word in a city council resolution. He knew that because he'd testified before another city about that same paragraph and remembered exactly where the sentence broke at the end of a line. He sat there on the floor for a long time, listening to the laptop fan run. Then he opened the department's public transparency portal, which existed because his paragraph had required it to exist, and searched for the quarterly compliance certifications. They were there. All 18 quarters. Signed. Filed on time. Tidy. And that was the problem. Nobody has 99% body cam compliance for 18 straight quarters. Not a decent department. Not even a great one. Cameras fail. Officers forget in the middle of a foot chase. Docking stations lose their network connection. In a department that size, the honest number sits in the low 90s, with a bad quarter dropping into the 80s when a firmware update goes wrong. He had audited 11 departments and had never seen a real pattern like the one on his screen, because it wasn't a pattern at all. It was a shelf. He looked at the signature block. Captain Dale Ashford, Professional Standards. Cross had met the man twice. Once in the city manager's office in July, a handshake and a jaw set in a very particular way. Once at a regional breakfast in Millrose, where Ashford had spent 9 minutes explaining why community review boards were a solution looking for a problem. Dale Ashford had been acting chief for 14 months, and he'd applied for the permanent job. The city had run a nationwide search and hired a 39-year-old lieutenant colonel from the State Patrol's Professional Standards Division, more than 300 kilometers away. The photo wasn't released at all. That last part had been Cross's own request. He had put it in writing, and the reason was sitting in a July notebook in a single line. Let me see the city the way the city sees a man it doesn't know. He closed the laptop and checked on Amara, who was sleeping the way children sleep, sideways and all in, one foot sticking out from under the constellations. He stood in the dark doorway for a minute. Then his phone lit up on the cardboard box and kept lighting up. And by the time he picked it up, there were 19 notifications and a message from Verna Boyd that said, "Honey, I think you need to see this before tomorrow." Клип длился 1 минуту и 11 секунд. Его выложили в 4 часа дня, а к полуночи он набрал 260 тысяч просмотров. И подпись под ним оказалась совсем не той, которую он ожидал. Там было написано: «Мужчину вывели из начальной школы после того, как родители вызвали полицию. Сотрудников Ведерли хвалят за быструю реакцию». Клип начинался с наручников. Тот, кто снимал, вошел в коридор слишком поздно, так что в кадр не попал ни журнал посетителей, ни Прия Роман, говорящая, что встретила его 9 минут назад, ни ингалятор на полу. Все начиналось с того, как темнокожего мужчину в парусиновой куртке разворачивают к стене, и заканчивалось дверями. А между этим были 11 секунд, где женщина в кремовом пиджаке произносит слово «протокол». Кросс читал комментарии так, как читает диагностическое заключение, то есть не впуская в себя ни одну отдельную строчку. Слава Богу за внимательных родителей. Почему он вообще там находился? А потом ниже, по одному, по два, зазвучало уже что-то другое. Кто-нибудь вообще спросил, что он там делал? Посмотрите на его руки. В 2 часа ночи он все еще сидел на полу, прислонившись спиной к стене. Он ничего не опубликовал. Он не отправил ни одному человеку на этой земле письмо на городском бланке. Он открыл новый документ, записал время, а потом составил список из 6 пунктов. И именно в этом списке вся разница между человеком, который сводит счеты, и человеком, который добивается исправления. Журнал посетителей за 26 августа. История заявок на ремонт восточной служебной двери. Аудиозапись диспетчерской связи. Отчет об инциденте и приложенное к нему описание. Записи активации нательных камер у обоих прибывших экипажей. Квартальные сертификаты соответствия требованиям и исходные данные, на которых они основаны. В штате Огайо все это было публичной информацией. Он наизусть знал формулировки для запросов и знал, что слово «reasonable» — не пустой звук, если ты ведешь журнал, когда именно обратился. Он подал все 6 запросов в 4:11 утра. От собственного имени, как частное лицо, с личного адреса электронной почты. Потом он приготовил завтрак. Именно эту часть люди обычно пропускают, а она-то и важна. Через 22 часа после того, как его вывели в наручниках из школы его дочери, Элайджа Кросс стоял у плиты с 2 конфорками и готовил яйца так, как любила Амара. Нежный скрэмбл с сыром, аккуратно вмешанным внутрь. Он положил ингалятор в передний карман ее рюкзака и заставил ее повторить, где он лежит. А потом он отвез ее в школу, вошел вместе с ней через главный вход, расписался в журнале посетителей в 7:51 и, стоя у стойки, записал это время в свой блокнот. Бернис Кеплер сначала даже не подняла глаз. Потом подняла, и выражение ее лица полностью изменилось, и она вышла из-за стойки сбоку, чего никогда не делала. «Мистер Кросс», — сказала она, — «я не спала всю ночь». «Это не на вас. She let you through. That's what I told them. I told the officer at 10, the principal at 11, and the district office at 2. Her voice grew thin. I printed the log. I made 3 copies. Nobody asks me for one. Keep them, Cross said. Somebody will. Priya Raman met them by the whale mural, and for a moment the young teacher looked like she was about to apologize. He gave a small shake of his head, and she let it drop, saying instead, "She did great yesterday. She really did." She usually does. On his way out, he stopped by the east wing. The service door was propped open again. Same wedge, same tape over the latch, a mop bucket in the doorway. 24 hours after a hallway full of parents watched a school be saved on camera, the actual door anyone could have walked through still stood open onto Dunmore Avenue, with no one in the corridor. Cross wrote down the time, then wrote, "Still propped open, day 2, same wedge." Then he told Bernice Kepler and asked her to note who he told and when, and she wrote it on a sticky note and stuck it to her monitor where people would see it, which is more reliable than most software. He started work the following Monday. That was the part nobody in Harlow understood until much later. His appointment as chief took effect on the first Monday in September. The arrest happened on August 26th. For 11 days, Elijah Cross had a court date, a booking photo in a county database, and a badge on its way in the mail. He went to work as a private citizen with a case number, and as a chief with no official photo. Harlow's city manager was a compact, meticulous woman named Ruth Okonjo Lang, 58 years old, 8 years into the job, who ran meetings from a paper agenda and started them exactly on time. Cross told her the whole story in 4 minutes, flat and without adjectives, dates and times straight from the notebook. She turned her pen over twice on the blotter. "Elijah, I can make this go away by Thursday. 1 call to the prosecutor's office and a statement from this office. You'd have the case dismissed and an apology from the school board within a week." "I know. You don't want that." "No, ma'am." "Tell me why. And if the reason is pride, I'm going to tell you so." He said it the same way he'd said it to himself at 2 in the morning. "If you make 1 call, what happened in that hallway turns into a story about a chief who got mistaken for a criminal. Everyone gets to act shocked for 9 days, and then it's over. Nothing changes on Dunmore Avenue. Nothing changes in professional standards." He paused. "If it goes the usual way, whatever happens to me is what happens to any man in a canvas jacket. And then we find out what this department does when nobody important is watching. That's an audit you can't buy, and it's already underway." Ruth Okonjo Lang set the pen down. "You understand what you're risking. If you end up with a trespassing conviction at a school, I cannot make you chief of police. Not because I wouldn't want to, because the council wouldn't survive it." She held his gaze. "And if you lose, you do not get a second chief's job anywhere in this state." "I understand that too." "Then here is my condition." She pulled the legal pad toward her. "You do not touch a single record in this building as chief-elect. Anything you get as a private citizen, through the same clerk and the same forms as everyone else, and you get it slowly like everyone else. Because the day this comes out, the first thing they'll say is that you used the office." Cross almost smiled. "That's already what I did," he said. 6 requests Wednesday, 4:11 in the morning. Personal email. Ruth Okonjo Lang looked at him for a moment. "Well," she said. "All right then." The first small win came on September 9th, and it did not look like a win. It looked like a stack of paper. The clerk fulfilled 2 of the 6. The visitor log came back with his handwriting on it, his printed name, Amara Cross, room 11, 752. And a second entry at 8:10 in a different pen, because Bernice Kepler had entered it herself afterward with a note in the margin that said, "Re-entry, staff waived, inhaler." The work order history came back too, and it was better than he hoped because it was worse than he feared. 11 work orders in 4 years on that door. Latch mechanism failing. A note from a district maintenance supervisor in April that said staff propping to avoid re-entry issue. Recommend replacement of latch assembly. And a purchase order that was never issued because a budget line got pushed into the next fiscal year. 4 of the 6 came back denied or delayed. The dispatch audio, denied pending review. The incident report, delayed as part of an active case. The camera activation records came back with 2 lines that cross-read 4 times, standing at the counter in the clerk's office. No responsive records exist for the requested unit and date range. He stood there in the hum of the fluorescent lights with the paper in his hand. The compliance certification for that quarter, filed 16 days after his arrest and signed by Captain Dale Ashford, reported 99.2% activation compliance across the entire department. Those 2 things could not both be true. Cross walked over to the truck and wrote down the time. Then, on a fresh page, he drew a line down the middle. On the left, he wrote what the certification said. On the right, he wrote what the records office said. Between those 2 columns sat a man's entire career and, though he didn't know it yet, 18 months of a department's paperwork. He put the cap back on the pen. Then his phone rang, a Millrose number, and the voice on the other end said she was a reporter with the Harlow Ledger and that she had 2 questions. The first was whether he knew that the Parent Safety Committee at Weatherly had just voted to recommend a new visitor policy. He asked what was in it. She read it to him. And Elijah Cross sat in a hot truck outside the records office and listened to a policy that would have made everything that happened to him not just possible, but mandatory. The proposed policy had 4 provisions, and the third was the one that mattered. Any adult in the building who is not recognized by a staff member or committee volunteer shall be escorted to the office, and if the adult declines an escort or cannot be immediately verified, staff shall contact law enforcement. Not the office, law enforcement. And the trigger wasn't a badge or a log sheet or a door sensor. The trigger was whether someone was recognized. "Do you have a comment for the record, Mr. Cross?" the reporter asked. Her name was Trina Soule, 34 years old, 4 years at the Ledger, with a habit of leaving silence hanging at the end of a question and letting it do the work. "Not for the record," he said, "but thank you for reading it to me." The next morning, he was on Dunmore Avenue at 5:50, before the sun cleared the water tower, with a tape measure in his jacket and a stopwatch on his phone. The lot was empty except for a white sedan belonging to Walter Boyd, who had come in at 5:30 every day of his working life to unlock the building, run the boiler check, and raise the flag. The grass was wet. There was a smell of cut lawn and cold iron, and the halyard on the flagpole ticked against the metal like a slow clock. Cross started at the curb on Dunmore Avenue, at the spot where someone parking on the public street would put a foot on the ground. Across a 3-meter berm, up the service drive, left at the dumpster enclosure, along the east wall past 2 windows and an outdoor faucet, to the service door with a wedge under it and tape over the latch, through it, into the corridor by the boiler room, left past the janitor's closet, right where the whale mural began. 11 more steps to the open doorway of room 11. He stopped the timer. 9 seconds. 9 seconds from a public street to his daughter's desk. And the only thing in the way was a piece of masking tape. Walter Boyd came around the corner with a broom and saw a man standing outside room 11 at 6 in the morning, holding a phone. Mr. Cross. "Morning, Mr. Boyd." Walter Boyd was 64, and he'd worked in that building for 22 years. He looked down the corridor Cross had come through, then at the phone, and he understood the whole thing in about 2 seconds, which is what 22 years in a building will do. 9 seconds, he said. 9 seconds. "I put in the work order on that latch in April. I put one in the April before that, too." He leaned on the broom. "They sent a man out who oiled it and left." Cross wrote down the time. Then he said, "Would you say that again slowly, and would it be all right if I wrote your name next to it?" Walter Boyd said it again slowly. Then he said, "Mr. Cross, I was in that hallway that morning, down at the far end by the water fountain. I saw you. I got 16 seconds of it on my phone before my hands started shaking so bad I had to stop." He looked at the floor. "I didn't put it online. I didn't know what posting it would do to you." Cross stood very still. "Mr. Boyd, don't delete it." "No, sir. And don't post it either. Not yet. Email it to yourself so there's a date on it, and then leave it alone." "That's all?" "That's all. The date is everything." That was the morning Amara asked him to stop at the door. She had her backpack on both shoulders and her hand on the seatbelt, and she said, "You can just watch me from here." He turned around in his seat. "You don't want me to walk you in?" She did that thing with her mouth, working it out. 6 years old and already doing the kind of math no child should ever have to do. "If you come in, somebody might call the police again," she said. "And then you'd get in trouble on my birthday." Her birthday was in October. She had been carrying that around for 2.5 weeks. Cross got out of the truck, walked around it, and crouched down on the asphalt in the pickup lane with cars lined up behind him. He didn't tell her she was wrong. He told her it was his job to walk her inside, not her job to protect him, and that if anyone called anyone again, the same thing would happen, which was nothing, because he hadn't done anything. Then he walked her through the front doors, signed the log at 7:49, and wrote down the time in his notebook while standing at the counter. If this story is touching your heart, like the video and tell me in the comments what you would have done. The school board met on September 23rd in the district office multipurpose room, a place with a low ceiling, folding chairs, and a coffee urn making the same sound it had been making since the 1990s. There were around 60 people in those chairs, which was a crowd for a Harlow school board meeting. By then, the clip had done its work in both directions. Some parents had come to thank the safety committee, and others had spent a month watching that 1 minute of video and getting angrier and angrier. Delia Prescott presented the policy. She had a folder with tabbed dividers. She was good at it. That has to be said because it would be easy to make her into a fool, and she was not a fool. She talked about a school in another state where a man had walked into a kindergarten wing and a district in the next county that had switched to badge readers. She used the word children 14 times and the word protocol 9 times, and she read the third provision in the same tone as the other 3, as if it were just plumbing. Then the chair opened the floor for public comment. 3 minutes each. Sign the sheet at the back. Elijah Cross was 11th on the sheet. He had signed it E. Cross, Mercer Road. 9 people spoke before him. A grandmother in favor, a father against it, loudly, who got gavelled down for going over time. A man in a golf polo, the same man from the grass, who said the officers had done exactly what he would want done if it were his kid. Then a young woman in a yellow cardigan said her name was Priya Raman, that she taught first grade at Weatherly, and that she had been in that hallway. The room grew quiet in patches, closest in at first, then farther out. I told the officer, twice, that the man in handcuffs was my student's father and that I had met him 9 minutes earlier, she said. Her voice shook on the second part, and then it stopped shaking. I want that in the record. I told him twice, and it did not matter. And the reason it did not matter is nowhere in this policy. This policy says the trigger is whether staff recognize someone. I'm new. I recognize maybe 40 families out of 400. If you pass this, you are putting in writing that a parent's safety in my building depends on whether I happen to know his face. Delia Prescott leaned into her microphone and said the sentence that made the second half of this story inevitable. With all respect, we are not going to apologize for a policy that protects children because one gentleman had an inconvenient morning. An inconvenient morning. Someone in the third row said, out loud, "He was arrested." The chair tapped the gavel once and called the 11th speaker. E. Cross, Mercer Road. He walked up the center aisle in the canvas jacket. A rustle moved through the room as people who had seen the 1-minute clip recognized those shoulders. My name is Elijah Cross. My daughter is in room 11. He did not say the second thing. He had the letter in his pocket and a badge in a drawer on Fenner Street with a date on it, and a city manager sitting 2 rows from the back with her hands folded, who did not move a muscle. I'm not here about my morning, he said. I'm here about a door. And he told them about 9 seconds. He gave them the route, turn by turn, and the flat voice of a man reading directions. 11 work orders in 4 years. A latch assembly pushed into the next fiscal year. Tape was on that latch on August 26th and on the 27th, and it was still on it that morning at 6:04. He had timed the walk from the public curb to the open door of a first-grade classroom. 9 seconds. And in that same building, on that same morning, 4 adults had been asked to verify who they were, and all 4 had come in through the front door where the logbook was. You have a policy that watches the door with a book by it, he said, and no policy at all for the door with tape on it. That is not safety. That is the appearance of safety, and appearances cost money, and they cost somebody's morning, and they do not stop anybody. His 3 minutes ran out. The chair let him finish the sentence. He picked up the notebook, walked back down the aisle, and sat in a folding chair in the 9th row. The board tabled the policy for further study, 4-1. It was a small win, and not the one he needed, and he knew it. Because on the way out, a man in a suit was waiting by the coffee urn with his hands in his pockets. Капитан Дейл Эшфорд пришел на заседание школьного совета во вторник вечером. Он не записывался в список выступающих. Он не выступал. Весь этот час он простоял сзади. «Мистер Кросс», — сказал он тоном, столь же любезным, как дверной звонок. «Неплохое выступление для человека, у которого впереди суд». «Капитан», — ответил Кросс, — «вы знаете, кто я». «Знаю». Дейлу Эшфорду было 52. Виски уже серебрились, а сложением он напоминал человека, который был спортсменом в давно ушедшее десятилетие. 26 лет он прослужил в Харлоу. Прошел путь от патруля и дорожной полиции до отдела профессиональных стандартов, подразделения, которое расследует дела против офицеров. И 9 лет возглавлял его. 14 месяцев он исполнял обязанности начальника с кабинетом, парковочным местом и закрепленным креслом за столом совета. Но эту должность он так и не получил. Он узнал об этом на закрытом заседании в июле. А потом, в тот вечер, вернулся домой и 20 минут просидел в своей машине на собственной подъездной дорожке, прежде чем зайти внутрь. «Скажу честно», — произнес Эшфорд, — «я пришел посмотреть, что вы за человек». И... «Осторожный». Он произнес это как диагноз. 9 секунд, наряды на работы, статьи бюджета по финансовому году. Знаете, как это звучало? Как человек, который собирает досье. Это общественное здание, и это открытые документы. Это верно. Эшфорд улыбнулся только нижней половиной лица. Небольшой совет от человека, который повидал немало жалоб с другой стороны. Люди, которые собирают досье, думают, что в досье и есть суть, но это никогда не так. Суть в комнате и в том, кто в ней стоит. Он вынул руки из карманов. Признание вины по такому обвинению означает, что вы не сможете быть волонтером в этом здании, не сможете сопровождать школьные поездки, и это останется в базе данных, которую поднимает любая проверка биографии в Америке. Согласитесь на программу с прекращением дела. Отработайте 8 часов, и пусть все исчезнет. Я ничего не делал. Сынок, признание вины не об этом. Вот оно. Не оскорбление, не слово, которое можно было бы написать на плакате. Один единственный слог, брошенный человеку, который был на 10 лет моложе. И в этом слоге уместилась целая иерархия. Кросс никак не отреагировал, и что-то в челюсти Эшфорда отметило это как поражение. «Капитан, можно задать вам профессиональный вопрос? Ваши квартальные сертификации?» 18 кварталов подряд. Более 99% соблюдения активации. Как вам это удалось? С лица Эшфорда любезность слетела, как наклейка со стекла. «Подготовка», — сказал он, — «и контроль». Впечатляющая кривая. «У нас жесткая дисциплина в департаменте». «Именно», — сказал Кросс. «Вот это меня и интересует, потому что это и была утечка». Кросс сказал 18 кварталов, а Эшфорд ответил про департамент. Человек с чистыми цифрами спросил бы, какой офицер, какая смена, какая дата. Человек, у которого вместо кривой просто полка, защищает именно полку. Эскалация началась 9 дней спустя, и исходила она не из уст Эшфорда. В этом и был весь смысл. Сначала штраф за парковку, который он лично оплатил 2 сентября, внезапно вернулся как неоплаченный гражданский штраф с пеней за просрочку. Во-вторых, во вторник в квартиру на Мерсер-Роуд пришел инспектор по соблюдению жилищных норм, потому что в документах называлось анонимной жалобой на проживание и небезопасные условия с участием несовершеннолетнего ребенка. Инспектором оказался усталый мужчина по имени Кёртис. Он сделал 9 фотографий и сказал Кроссу, что жалоба не подтвердилась. А потом добавил неофициально, что работает в этой сфере уже 11 лет и ни разу еще не получал жалоб на корпоративное жилье формата Extended Stay. В-третьих, и вот это действительно его подкосило, сорвалась ожидавшаяся продажа дома на Белвуд-стрит. Агент по продаже позвонила в четверг, извиняющимся и расплывчатым тоном, который сам по себе уже многое говорил. Продавцы приняли другое предложение. Фразу «in the interest of a clean clothes» она повторила дважды. Брокерская компания, выставлявшая объект, называлась Prescott Halloway Realty. Кросс ей не позвонил. Вместо этого он поехал в окружное управление регистратора, заплатил $1 за публичную регистрацию нового договора купли-продажи, записал время и подшил документ в папку. И Рут Аконджи Лэнг он тоже ничего не сказал. Позже это оказалось важным. Когда все всплыло наружу, сити-менеджер смогла под присягой сказать, что узнала о доме на Белвуд-стрит из той же газетной статьи, что и все остальные, потому что той осенью Элайджа Кросс 9 раз заходил в ее кабинет и ни разу о нем не упомянул. Вместо этого он просто старался сохранить жизнь дочери такой же, какой она была всегда. Он выучил имена всех 22 детей из 11 комнаты. Выяснил, у кого мама работает по ночам, а кто боится сушилок для рук. Он записался помогать на осеннем празднике, и его поставили на аттракцион с тортами. Но комитет Дели и Прескотт перевел его дежурить на парковку, и он 3 часа отработал там в светоотражающем жилете, никому ни слова об этом не сказав. 9 октября Амаре исполнилось 7. Он испек кривоватый двухъярусный торт с пластиковым динозавром сверху, потому что именно это она и попросила. И Верна Бойд принесла кукурузный хлеб, который никому не был нужен. А Майка пришел с пеналом для механических карандашей и с матерью по имени Даян, которая стояла в дверях, пока дети были в другой комнате, и тихо сказала, что перестала читать страницу того комитета и уже 6 недель чувствует стыд. Он ответил, что стыдиться не нужно, а если до этого дойдет, пусть будет свидетелем. Она написала свой номер на обратной стороне праздничной салфетки, и он положил салфетку в блокнот. Новый виток нажима пришел 16 октября в заказном письме из окружной прокуратуры. Они не предлагали альтернативное урегулирование. They were moving ahead to trial on the trespassing charge, with the added specification that it took place on school grounds. The reason was in the 4th paragraph, and Cross read it standing in the lot on Mercer Road with the envelope clenched between his teeth. The state's case was based on a supplemental narrative filed by the responding officer, claiming that the defendant had been told he was not authorized to be there, had refused a lawful order to leave, and had been seen entering the building through a secured service entrance. Through a secured service entrance. Cross had walked in through the front doors. Twice. There was a sign-in sheet with his handwriting on it, and a woman with 3 photocopies of it sitting on her desk. He turned the page. The supplemental narrative was dated September 11th. 16 days after the arrest. The original report, filed the same day, was a page and a half long and said only that a subject had been detained pending verification and removed at the request of school administration. Somebody had rewritten the story 16 days later, after his records requests landed at the clerk's office. He stood in that lot for a long moment. The sprinkler was running, the way it always did at dawn and again at dusk, whether it had rained or not, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and freshly cut grass. Then he drove to the west substation and didn't go in. He parked across the street and watched the Sally Port for 40 minutes, and what he was looking at was not the officers. It was a rack on the wall of the equipment bay, visible through the open bay door, with a row of black docking stations mounted on it. 11 of the 16 slots held a camera and a green light. 5 were empty. One of those 5 had a strip of masking tape across it with something written on it. He couldn't read it from across the street. He wrote down what he could make out and the time, then went home and made dinner. Then, at 9:40 that night, with Amara asleep and the laptop balanced on the cardboard box, he did the thing that ended it. Nothing dramatic, the most boring thing imaginable. He read the certifications again, all 18 of them. Not the percentages, the attachments. 17 of the 18 cited an export from the platform. 1 did not. The most recent one, the one signed 16 days after his arrest. Its footnote cited a local spreadsheet on a departmental drive, maintained by professional standards, and the total contact count on it was 406 for the quarter, in a department that had logged 612 officer-initiated contacts in the same quarter the year before, in a city whose population had not changed. 206 contacts had not been counted. And if you don't count a contact, you never have to count whether it was recorded. Cross leaned back until his spine pressed against the wall. Then he did the math he'd been avoiding for 6 weeks. If Professional Standards wasn't pulling activation data from the platform, then somebody had access to the platform's audit trail. And under the standard he himself had written 9 years earlier, that audit trail was required to log every deletion request, every retention override, and every user who made one. Which meant there was a record of the thing being hidden, preserved by the very paragraph the department had adopted word for word. He picked up the phone and called the one person in Ohio who could pull it. It was 11 that night. She answered. "Nadine, it's Elijah Cross." A pause, and then the sound of a woman sitting up. "Colonel," said Nadine Voss. "Or is it Chief now?" "Not yet," Cross said. "And that's exactly why I'm calling you and not somebody in my own building." Nadine Voss was a major in the State Patrol's Professional Standards Division, and 9 years earlier, she had sat 3 seats down from Elijah Cross in a conference room in Columbus, drafting the language that 1,100 Ohio municipalities would eventually adopt. He told her everything in 11 minutes. She didn't interrupt. "Understand what I can and cannot do," she said. "I cannot pull anything for you. You're a private citizen with an open criminal case, and if I look at a Harlow file as a favor, a defense attorney turns this into a story about the state helping its friend." "I know. That's not what I'm asking." "Then what are you asking?" "Those certifications aren't filed with Harlow. They're filed with the Attorney General's office, and your division reviews them. I'm a member of the public telling a state agency that a filing it holds contains a number that cannot be true, and pointing to the footnote that changed." There was a long silence, and then the sound of a woman writing. "That," Nadine Voss said, "is a complaint. And it's a complaint I have to process whether I like you or not." "Yes, ma'am." "Elijah," she stopped writing, "you know what happens if I open this and the numbers come back clean. It looks like a man under indictment attacking the officer who arrested him." "Then it looks like that. Open it anyway." She opened it on October 22nd. It got a file number and went into a queue, and the queue was 14 weeks long. The blow landed 4 days later on district letterhead. "Pursuant to board policy on individuals with pending criminal matters involving school property, Mr. Elijah Cross is restricted from all district buildings and grounds, excepting vehicle drop-off and pickup lanes, pending resolution." Except for the hallways. He could sit in a truck at the curb. He could not walk his daughter to the whale mural. He could not stand in the doorway of room 11. He could not come to the fall program on November 7th, when the first grade sang 4 songs about the harvest, and when Amara Cross had the 4th line in the second song, a line she had practiced in the bathroom mirror for 2 weeks. He didn't tell her that night, because it was Tuesday and she had a spelling test, and there is a kind of courage that consists only in knowing the right order to do things. He told her on Thursday, at the table, "Baby, I can't be inside the school for a while. Some adults made a rule about it while they sort out the mistake." She set down her fork. "For the program?" "For the program." "But it's my line." "It's your line," he said. "And I'm going to hear it." "How?" "Miss Verna is going to hold up her phone the whole time, and I'm going to be out in the parking lot in the truck with the window down." Amara Cross was 7 years old, and she had lost her mother in a grocery store parking lot 2 summers earlier, and she was very good at the math of who was going to be where. "That's not the same," she said. "No," he said, "it isn't." She got up from the table and went to her room, which she had never done before, and he let her go. and he sat there in a rented kitchen at 6:40 in the evening with his hands flat on the table. Then he heard her coming back down the hall. She had the small blue inhaler in one hand and his black notebook in the other. She set the notebook on the table in front of him and pushed it an inch toward him with 2 fingers. "You should write down the time," she said. "That's what you do when something isn't fair." He wrote down the time. November 7th was cold and clear. He was in the parking lot at 6:50 with the window down and the heater on, and Verna Boyd sat in the 3rd row of a multi-purpose room 40 yards away, holding a phone above her church hat with both arms for 19 minutes. The audio came through the truck window in fragments, and on the 4th line of the 2nd song, a small voice said the words about the pumpkins and the rain, clear as a bell, and a man sat alone in a truck and put his hand over his mouth. Someone filmed him doing that too, from a 2nd-floor window. It didn't go anywhere for 4 months. Then it went everywhere. Ryan Merrick's own breaking point came 11 days earlier, and almost no one has ever heard about it, because it happened in an equipment bay with only 2 people there. He went looking for the footage in the 3rd week of October, not because of a subpoena, because his wife asked him a question at the kitchen table he couldn't answer. Had he watched it back? He hadn't. At the end of his shift, he went to the bay, pulled up his own history, and found nothing for August 26th. Then he went to the rack. There was a strip of masking tape across Bay 9, written on it in marker, "Out of service, do not dock, P.S." His camera had been in Bay 9 since spring. A camera that doesn't dock doesn't upload. And it doesn't delete either, because deletion happens on the server after upload, and the retention clock starts from the upload date. Which meant everything the device had recorded and never transmitted was still sitting inside it, in a rack, under a piece of tape, with a dead battery and a memory chip that didn't care. Merrick was holding it when Dale Ashford came into the bay. "Captain, my camera hasn't uploaded since March." "That rack's got a network fault. It's been reported. Purchasing." Ashford said the word like he was shutting a door with his hip. Merrick looked down at the camera in his hand. "There's nothing on that device," Ashford said, "because that device is out of service. Put it back." And this is the part Ryan Merrick needed 9 years before he could say it out loud in a training room full of recruits. And it's why this story is about him, too. He put it back. He put it back in Bay 9, smoothed the tape flat with his thumb, went home, didn't sleep, and said nothing for 31 days. The trial was set for December 4th at the county courthouse on Alder Street. At first, Cross had a public defender, a decent, overworked man named Cy Kaplan with 400 cases. Then, in November, Kaplan called and said in a strange voice that a firm in Columbus had entered an appearance free of charge, that the attorney's name was Marguerite Okonjo, and had Cross arranged this? He had not. Ruth Okonjo Lang had a sister. The city manager did exactly one thing that fall, and it was not a phone call to a prosecutor, and she never told him about it. Cross met Marguerite Okonjo on November 21st. In silence, she read the notebook front to back, every page from that fall, for 50 minutes. Then she closed it and placed both hands on top of it. "Mr. Cross, in 19 years, I have never had a client hand me a contemporaneous, time-stamped log of every event in his own case. It's a habit. It's a chain of custody." She tapped it once. "Now here's the hard part. We win this on the log sheet, Miss Rahman, and on Mr. Boyd's 16 seconds. That gets you an acquittal in a courtroom with 9 people in it and 1 reporter. It does not get you the job back. It does not get you the certifications, and it does not get you the 14 weeks that state complaint has been sitting in a queue. I know. Then let me ask you what I ask everybody. What is it you actually want? Cross looked out the window for a moment. A city in late November and a river the color of nickel. I want the latch replaced, he said. I want a policy in that district that's triggered by a log, not a face. I want whatever is broken in professional standards uncovered by somebody who doesn't work for the man who signed off on it. And I want my daughter to see it get fixed, so the next time somebody looks at her father sideways, she knows what a person does about it. And the officer? He made a mistake he's been trained into for 6 years, Cross said. I want him to have to watch it. Marguerite Okonjo wrote one line on a legal pad. Then we are not filing a motion to dismiss, she said. We go to trial, and we subpoena the body cam activation records for both units. And when the department certifies that no responsive records exist, we subpoena the physical device inventory instead. Because a department with no footage still has hardware, and hardware has serial numbers, and serial numbers have doc logs. Cross sat very still. Bay 9, he said. I'm sorry? There's a rack in the West Substation Equipment Bay. 16 slots. 5 empty, 1 with tape on it. He took out the pen. I couldn't read the tape from across the street. Marguerite Okonjo looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Cross, we are going to read the tape. The subpoena for the physical inventory went out on December 2nd. It was served at 4 in the afternoon. It was on Dale Ashford's desk by 4:20, and at 4:50, Ryan Merrick was called into the captain's office and told to shut the door. He came out 11 minutes later, walked past the Sally Port, went into the equipment bay, took his camera out of Bay 9 and carried it to the front desk. Then he did the thing that cracked the case open. And he did it in the most careful way a man in his position could. He did not hand it to anybody in Harlow. He drove it to the State Patrol post on Route 9 and walked in with it in a paper evidence bag he had labeled himself and asked for the professional standards duty officer and stood at that counter in his own uniform and said 11 words that ended 2 careers, one of which he had assumed would be his. I need to report a failure to preserve. It's mine. The camera had 11 hours and 40 minutes of recording that had never been uploaded, covering the period from March to September, and the file index was intact because nothing had touched the device except a dead battery. The file from August 26th was 41 minutes long, and its activation timestamp was 8:03 that morning. 1 minute before Merrick came through the front doors of Weatherly Elementary. The camera had been on the whole time. The light on the front had been dead since spring, along with the battery indicator and the upload beacon, because Bay 9 had never charged anything. The officer wearing it truly believed it was off. But the device recorded everything anyway, onto a chip, in a rack, under a piece of tape, for 100 days. It recorded Delia Prescott walking backward in front of him, saying, "He came in the side entrance, nobody knows him." It recorded a man's voice, calm and unhurried, saying, "Albuterol, my daughter's, she's in room 11. It recorded a young woman's voice twice, louder the second time. "He signed the log. Bernice waved him through. I watched him do it." It recorded the ratcheting sound of a double lock, twice. It recorded a woman with a clipboard saying people like him don't just wander into a school like this for no reason. And then 4 seconds of nothing but the ventilation. And at 11 minutes and 19 seconds, it recorded a small voice saying, "Daddy," and a father saying, "Baby, I'm okay. This is a mistake, and the grown-ups are going to fix it. And then, 4 seconds later, go on. 4 braids. Nadine Voss watched that part twice, then went out into the parking lot for a while. But the evidence that ended Dale Ashford's 26-year career was not the video. It was 3 lines in a doc log. The rack's controller kept a local record of every insertion and removal, by bay, by device serial number, by badge number, whether the network was up or not, in a rolling buffer covering 18 months. No one had ever asked it for anything. It contained 4,109 entries. On March 19th, at 7:10 in the evening, the device with the serial number ending in 447 had been removed from Bay 4 and inserted into Bay 9 under a certain badge number, and it had not been removed again until December 2nd. The badge number was not Ryan Merrick's. It belonged to Captain Dale Ashford of Professional Standards, and it appeared in that log 206 times over 18 months, moving cameras into 3 specific bays on a rack reported as having a network fault in a work order Ashford himself had written. No technician was ever sent, because the work order had been closed as resolved by the same badge number 11 minutes after it was opened. 206 контактов. Без записи. 206 ходов. Это не было попыткой замять один единственный арест. Это была машина. Она работала уже 1,5 года, и арест Элайджа Кросса был для нее обычным вторником. Именно этот вывод сделал дело вопросом штата, а не внутренним делом Харлоу. Эшфорд не прикрывал Меррика. Он прикрывал цифру. Потому что именно эта цифра служила доказательством того, что должность должны были отдать ему, и полка должна была оставаться ровной. Слушание проходило 8 декабря в конференц-зале сити-менеджера на 4-м этаже муниципального здания. Длинный стол, белая доска и 9 стульев. Присутствовали Рут Аконджа-Ланг, Надин Восс и 2 следователей штата, главный юрисконсульт города, капитан Дейл Эшфорд с представителем профсоюза и адвокатом, Райан Меррик, отстраненный от службы, стенографистка, и в самом конце стола мужчина в брезентовой куртке, которого пригласили присутствовать как заявителя. Дейл Эшфорд вошел уже говоря, и 11 минут спустя он все еще говорил. И это было хорошее выступление в том смысле, в каком хорошим бывает 3-й акт плохой пьесы. Стойка с задокументированной сетевой неисправностью. Отдел закупок, который 2 года тянул с заменой. Цифры, поданные добросовестно на основе лучших из доступных данных. Надин Восс дала ему договорить до конца. В этом и состоит техника. Сначала позволяешь человеку построить весь дом, и только потом показываешь ему межевой план. Потом она подтолкнула по столу один лист. «Капитан, это чей номер жетона?» В комнате надолго воцарилась тишина. Слышался шум отопительной вентиляции, а где-то внизу, на Феннер-стрит, грузовик проехал перекресток с дребезжащим задним бортом. «Мне нужно посмотреть контекст», — сказал Эшфорд. 206 раз», — сказала она. «Хотите, я зачитаю даты?» Рут Аконджа-Ланг положила ручку на свою повестку и, совсем не повышая голоса, сказала: «Дейл, посмотри вдоль стола». Элайджа Кросс сидел в дальнем конце, сложив руки на черной записной книжке, перетянутой резинкой. За 50 минут он не произнес ни слова и не произнес ни слова сейчас. «Ты встречался с ним в июле», — сказала Рут Аконджа-Ланг. «В моем кабинете, 1,5 минуты». И тогда по лицу Дейла Эшфорда что-то промелькнуло. Не стыд. Стыд пришел в марте, наедине, в другой комнате. То, что промелькнуло у него по лицу, было арифметикой. «Вы сказали мне, что поиск ничего не дал», — сказал он. I told you the council went into closed session, she said. You heard what you needed to hear. She turned a page. For the record, the individual at the end of this table is Elijah Cross, appointed Chief of Police of the City of Harlow, effective the first Monday in September. An appointment currently suspended at his own written request, pending the resolution of a criminal charge stemming from his arrest at his daughter's elementary school on August 26th. At his own request, Nadine Voss said. In writing on August 28th, said Ruth Akanjo Lang. 2 days later, I have the letter. Dale Ashford turned in his chair and looked at Cross properly for the first time. You've been sitting in this building since September. I have, Cross said. You knew what you were on August 26th. In that hallway. I did. And you let a patrol officer put handcuffs on the chief of police of this city in front of a school. Ashford's voice rose, and it was the only voice that rose in that room all day. Do you know what that does to this department? You could have said one word, and none of this happens. Cross let the silence hang there for about 3 seconds. That's true, he said. And if I had said it, you'd still be signing certifications. That latch would still have tape on it, and the next man in that hallway wouldn't have had a state investigator watching his arrest on video. You used your own daughter as— Careful, Captain, said Marguerite Akanjo from the wall, where she had been sitting the entire time with her hands in her lap. Cross said quietly, My daughter watched me being let out of her school. I would give a great deal to undo that. I can't. So instead, I made sure it meant something. And I did it without touching a single file in this building, through the same clerk and the same forms as anyone else. And I have the timestamps. He placed 2 fingers on the notebook and did not open it. You said something to me at that school board meeting. You said men who build files start to think the file is the point, when the point is the room and who's standing in it. He looked up. You were half right, Captain. The file is how you get into the room. The recommendation went to the city's law director that afternoon. Dale Ashford was placed on unpaid leave pending termination for falsifying official records, dereliction of duty, and interference with an evidentiary process. The state referred the certifications to the county prosecutor, and 11 months later, he entered a plea to 1 count of tampering with records, receiving a suspended sentence and permanent decertification. Dale Ashford will never wear a badge in Ohio again for as long as he lives. Он не был убит. Его не тащили силой. Ему было 52 года, и он потерял единственное, кем когда-либо был. И потерял это в комнате для совещаний с 9 стульями, из-за бумаг, а только так это и становится по-настоящему окончательным. Дело Райан Америка было особенным, и стало оно таким из-за 11 слов, сказанных у стойки на шоссе номер 9. Штат установил, что он не проверил свое снаряжение, не попытался найти журнал регистрации, лежавший в 12 метрах от него, и подал рапорт с утверждением, что он вошел через охраняемый служебный вход, которое противоречило его собственной записи. Последнее было самым серьезным. Именно этого одного уже достаточно, чтобы карьера закончилась. Вот только рапорт был написан не Райаном Мериком. Его составили для его подписи и вручили ему в кабинете капитана, и он его подписал. И он сам сказал об этом вслух, под протокол, в тот момент, когда представитель профсоюза говорил ему прекратить говорить. Я подписал. Никто не заставлял меня держать ручку. Его понизили в должности, отстранили на 160 часов без сохранения зарплаты, лишили права обучать в полевых условиях на 2 года и обязали пройти программу переподготовки. Работу он сохранил, с перевесом в 1 голос в комиссии из 3 человек. А 4 декабря, за 4 дня до того слушания, он стоял в здании суда на Олдер-стрит и сделал то, о чем его никто не просил, и от чего его собственный адвокат письменно отговаривал. В зале суда на Олдер-стрит было 11 рядов скамей и батарея, которая включалась со стуком. И утром 4 декабря там находились 9 человек, на 8 больше обычного для мисдеминора 4 степени. Сторона обвинения изложила свою позицию за 50 минут. Делия Прескотт показала, что встретила в коридоре незнакомого взрослого мужчину, попросила его пройти с ней в офис и вызвала полицию из избыточной осторожности. Трина Соуэлл сидела во втором ряду с собственным блокнотом. Маргарет Аконджо задала ей 4 вопроса. «Миссис Прескотт, сколько семей обучается в Везерли Элементари?» «Думаю, около 400. Скольких вы узнаете в лицо?» Пауза. «Я не могу назвать число». Подходили ли вы в какой-либо момент тем утром к офису у входа, который был в 12 метрах, и просили показать вам журнал посетителей? Нет. Спасибо. У меня больше нет вопросов. Затем обвинение вызвало своего же прибывшего по вызову офицера, потому что было обязано, и Райан Меррик принес присягу и сел на место для дачи показаний в костюме вместо формы, потому что уже 2 дня находился в административном отпуске. Прокурор стал разбирать с ним рапорт, и на 4-м вопросе Меррик остановился.
Counselor, before I answer that, there's a supplemental report in this file with my signature on it, dated September 11th, saying the defendant came in through a secured service entrance. He put his hands on the rail. That statement is false. I did not witness that. I signed a narrative someone else drafted for me, and I should not have. He came in through the front door. The office log says so. A teacher told me so twice while I was putting handcuffs on him, and my body cam recorded the whole thing, which I didn't know until 9 days ago. The prosecutor asked for a recess. It was granted. The state moved to dismiss at 11:22 that morning. The judge dismissed the charge with prejudice, and then did something no one had asked for. He made a statement on the record. For the record, the court notes that the exculpatory evidence in this matter existed on the day of the arrest, was in the possession of the arresting agency, and was found only because the defendant, acting as a private citizen, filed public records requests at 4 in the morning. That should trouble everyone in this room. When it was over, Elijah Cross stood up and did not look at the gallery. In the marble hallway outside, Delia Prescott stood by the water fountain with her coat draped over her arm. She stepped into his path and opened her mouth. Cross stopped and waited. "I want you to know, I have never in my life," she began. He waited. He did not help her. He had spent 16 years listening to people search for the end of that sentence, and he knew there was no ending that would make anything different. "I did what I thought I was supposed to do," she said. Cross gave a single nod, small, neutral. Nothing warm in it, nothing cold either. Then he walked past her into the December light, where Verna Boyd was waiting at the curb with the engine running. That nod aired on the evening news in 4 states. Trina Soul's story went live at 6 that night, under a headline that answered the caption on a 1-minute clip that had gone unchallenged for 100 days. The man arrested at Weatherly Elementary was Harlow's incoming chief of police. He didn't tell anyone. Then Walter Boyd's 16 seconds came out, with an email timestamp from August 26th, which meant no one could say it had been edited. Then the state released the 41-minute file, with the children's faces blurred and one small voice left in, because when Cross was asked whether to cut it, he said, after a long pause, "Leave it. That's the whole reason any of this is here." 260,000 people watched a school get saved. 9 million watched what actually happened.
The consequences weren't violent, and none of them were illegal, and every single one came on paper. Dale Ashford was terminated on December 19th. The Weatherly Parent Safety Committee was dissolved by the district on December 22nd and reformed in February with a written charter, an appointed staff liaison, and a rule that its chair could serve no more than 2 consecutive years. Delia Prescott resigned before the vote. The district declined to renew Prescott Halloway Realty's relocation referral agreement in January, a contract worth nearly $60,000 a year, and 2 of her 4 agents left that spring for a brokerage in Millrose. She was not ruined. She still sells houses on the north side of Harlow. What she lost was a laminated card in her wallet, a contract, and the things she had really been protecting all along. The assumption that she was the one who got to decide who belonged in a hallway. The city settled with Elijah Cross for an undisclosed amount, and he did not keep the money. Through the city's law director, he directed it into 2 things: the replacement of the latch assembly and door hardware on the east service entrance at Weatherly Elementary, which cost $1,900 and took a contractor 4 hours, and an endowment at the county library in the name of Renata Cross that buys books for a first-grade reading room. That was the invoice. $1,900 and 4 hours, weighed against 4 months, 1 arrest, 41 raised phones, a canceled house sale, and a girl who asked whether she could just be dropped off at the curb. Someone said out loud at a council meeting that if the district had issued the purchase order in April, none of this would have happened. Nobody had an answer to that. The board rewrote the visitor policy in February. Cross was asked to comment on the draft, and he sent back a single change, which the board adopted unanimously. The trigger was no longer whether a staff member recognized an adult. The trigger was the log. Any adult in the building is verified against the front office visitor record. If a person is not in the record, a staff member walks them to the office. Law enforcement is contacted when a person refuses to be verified or when there is a specific, clearly stated threat. Recognition is not a security measure and shall not be used as one. That last sentence is his. It now appears in the policies of 11 Ohio districts and in a state school safety guidance document published the following year, and nobody who reads it has any idea where it came from. He was sworn in as Chief of Police of the City of Harlow on January 12th in the second-floor council chamber with 140 people in the room and a line stretching out into the hallway. He wore the uniform for the first time. It didn't fit the way the canvas jacket had fit. Ruth Okonjo Lang read the oath from a paper card. Amara Cross stood on a folding chair beside her father, wearing the sunflower dress in January, because that was the dress, and she held the black notebook in both hands, because he had given it to her and asked her to keep it while his hands were occupied. He said the words. He didn't give a speech afterward, which disappointed quite a few people who had come expecting one. He said 11 words and sat down. I've met a lot of you already. You just didn't know it. Ryan Merrick came back from suspension in April, on the midnight shift, in a patrol car with a camera that docked in Bay 4. Through his union representative, he asked whether he could say something to the chief in private. Cross said no. Then he said, "Tell him he can say it to me in the roll call room with the whole shift there. Because something said in private is a favor between 2 men, and something said in a room is a record." Merrick took 9 days to decide. Then, at 11:50 at night, he stood up in the roll call room in front of 14 officers and said what he had done, what he had signed, and what it had cost. And he has given some version of it in a training room every spring since then. Cross listened from the back with his arms folded and said one sentence when it was over. "Verify. It's cheaper than this." And then, on a Tuesday morning in the middle of May, the radio in Harlow Dispatch put out a call about a suspicious man at Weatherly Elementary School on Dunmore Avenue. The call came in at 8:11 from the front office from Bernice Kepler, and it was nothing like the one in August. It was about a man in the east parking lot who had been sitting in a car for 40 minutes watching the kindergarten doors, and Bernice Kepler had his plate number, the make of the car, the time he arrived, and the fact that he was not in her visitor log and had not tried to come inside. That's what a policy triggered by a log produces. Not fewer calls, better ones. 2 units responded. Cross heard the address come over the radio in his office on the 3rd floor of the municipal building, and 6 minutes later he was in his car and on Dunmore Avenue, and he didn't turn on the lights, and he has never fully explained to anyone why he went. By the time he came up the rise, both units were in the lot, and an officer named Delia Reyes had the man out of the car, talking to him with her hands loose at her sides. It turned out to be nothing much, the way most calls do. A father. A custody order he was on the wrong side of by 11 hours. A lawyer's phone number, and a long, quiet conversation that ended with him driving away without getting within 60 meters of a door. No cuffs, no hallway. 2 cameras were rolling with green lights on, and both activation timestamps were logged before first contact. Cross parked at the curb on Dunmore Avenue and stood there in a chief's uniform, and that was when the second thing happened, the thing people in Harlow still talk about. The morning bell hadn't rung yet. Parents were standing on the grass, the drop-off line was 3 cars deep, and the crossing guard had her whistle, though she didn't need it. And plenty of those people had spent that winter watching a 41-minute video of a man being led out of that building past that flagpole. Then somebody started clapping. It wasn't like in the movies. It was thin and awkward, started by maybe 6 people, then grew, and a woman near the flagpole was crying in a way she clearly hadn't expected, while a man in a golf shirt stood with his hands at his sides, neither clapping nor walking away. Phones came up, 40 of them, maybe more. Same building, same grass, same flagpole, 9 months later. The 2 officers did what officers do when they realize the chief is at the curb. They straightened up and saluted, and Cross returned it, and the whole thing was over in 4 seconds, and those 4 seconds ended up everywhere. He didn't make a speech in that parking lot either. He walked over to Walter Boyd, who was standing by the east wing with a push broom, shook his hand, and asked about his knee. Then he walked to the east service door and laid his hand flat against it. A new latch assembly. Heavy plate, a closer at the top, a firm, definite click when it caught. No wedge, no tape. He tested it twice, because he tests things twice. Bernice Kepler came out with the visitor log on a clipboard and made him sign it, which she found funnier than he did. He printed his name and the time, then wrote that same time in the notebook, standing there on the sidewalk. 8:19 in the morning. I hope you enjoyed that story. Like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. They closed on the house on Bellwood Street in June, through a broker in Milrose, for $4,100 over the original asking price. It has a back step with a loose second board and a maple tree hanging over the driveway, and Amara picked her room by standing in each of the 2 upstairs doorways for a full minute with her eyes closed. She's 8 now. She reads at a 4th grade level and is unbearable about it. Micah still comes over, still carrying that mechanical pencil case, and the 2 of them are still in an ongoing argument over whether the loose board should be fixed or left alone. The board is still there because she argued that it lets you know somebody's coming. He does the braids on Tuesdays and Fridays. He can do 6 now. It took him a year and a half, learning from a video by a woman in Baton Rouge
who has no idea she taught a chief of police anything. Some nights, after Amara is asleep, Elijah Cross sits at the kitchen table in a house with a maple tree over the driveway, takes the rubber band off the notebook, and writes down the time. That is all he does. The time, then the fact. A door that was checked. A number that didn't look right. A name he wants to remember. There are 22 of them in a box now, and the 20th one, the one that spent an afternoon on a shelf in a basement on Fenner Street, is the one his daughter carried into a folding chair in a council chamber in January, and the one she is asked to keep when she's older. He said yes. Dale Ashford works in a warehouse outside Milrose and doesn't talk about any of it. His plea is a matter of public record. He was 52 when it ended, and he had been that thing for 26 years, and now he isn't. And that is the whole sentence, and there is nothing satisfying about it. Ryan Merrick made sergeant on his second try, 3 years later, and he brings a brown paper evidence bag to the first class of every training cycle and sets it on the table, and he doesn't open it until the end. And in the front office of Weatherly Elementary, taped to the side of a monitor where someone will actually see it, there is an index card in Bernice Kepler's handwriting, recopied twice because the ink faded, and it says, "Check the book, not the face." The board never voted on that one. Nobody had to. Cross still walks his daughter in on the first day of school every year. He signs the log at the counter and smooths the sticker flat over his shirt pocket, over the notebook, and walks her down the main hall and turns left at the Whale. Nobody stops him anymore. They just say, "Good morning, Chief," and he says good morning back and writes down the time.
Elijah Cross's story proves that real leadership isn't about demanding special treatment, but about making sure there is justice for everyone. His calm in the face of humiliation was not weakness. It was discipline, courage, and a refusal to let anger destroy the truth. Instead of using his title to get out of the situation, he patiently exposed a system that judged people by appearances while ignoring real dangers and documented failures. His determination to protect both his daughter and the wider community deserves deep respect. Sometimes the strongest response to injustice is not revenge, but making sure the same injustice cannot happen to the next innocent person.